She sang her child a final lullaby in the snow. Then a human's footsteps changed everything forever. The snow on Weatherin 6 didn't fall. It cut, like shards of shattered glass hurled sideways by the wind. No stars blinked through the cloud-choked sky. No satellites moved overhead. The air itself felt hollow, scraped raw of sound. Whatever civilization had once tried to tame this planet had long since frozen to death beneath its own ambition. Jonas Varen didn't expect to hear anything human again. Not here. Not now. Not after 3 winters of silence. He stood in the outer access corridor, watching the horizon through a panel streaked with frost and rust. The geothermal heaters rumbled somewhere deep below, too distant to matter. His coat, insulation foam patched with synth leather and old uniform straps, creaked as he shifted. And then he heard it. A voice. A lullaby. Not spoken. Not screamed. Sung. A cracked melody drifting through the storm, barely louder than the wind clawing at the relay station's steel ribs. Wavering. Raw. Each note fragile, as if it might break midair and fall to pieces. Jonas froze. Every muscle went still, breath caught halfway to his lungs. His first thought was that the wind was mocking him. He'd heard things before. Phantoms built from rusted metal moaning under pressure. The cry of ice shifting across support beams like forgotten voices. But this was different. The sound twisted through the air like memory. Old, worn, painful. Something in his chest clenched without permission. Stay awake, little light. Close your eyes, just one more time. Dream where there's no cold, no pain. Mama's arms will keep you safe. His fingers twitched at his side. For a second, he didn't realize he was gripping the reinforced baton clipped to his belt. He loosened it, drew in a sharp breath that felt like inhaling ice. It's not real. You're tired. Hearing ghosts again. Then the wind shifted, and he heard again. Closer. She was still singing. Jonas grabbed his rebreather mask and shoulder pack without thinking. Boots slammed against the deck. The access door groaned open, wind howling and like a beast uncaged. He stepped into it without hesitation, blinking against the freezing sting. Snow didn't pile here, it sliced. Angled daggers of frozen carbon blew sideways across a dead landscape scattered with the bones of a failed colony. Half-buried relay towers, collapsed dome husks, shattered solar pylons stripped clean by decades of scavenger storms. His visibility was almost nothing, but he knew these paths by muscle memory. He turned toward the collapsed comms array, then angled south where the geothermal mist rose faintly from the ground, marking heat seams. The song had come from there. He moved fast. If there was someone alive, they wouldn't be for long. Whether an SXS wind didn't whisper, it scraped. Across his faceplate, across his ribs, across the guilt he'd buried and failed to kill. Every sound echoed too loudly in his ears. Then, something dark interrupted the white. He slowed, crouched behind a fractured bulkhead, adjusted his optics. There, curled in the half-shelter of a shattered shuttle pod, was a woman. Tall, thin, skin pale blue. Not frostbite, not human. She glowed faintly, not with light, but with something inside her, bioluminescence dulled by exposure and exhaustion. White hair tangled around her face like snowdrift threads. Her robe was ceremonial, barefoot, sleeveless, the wrong kind of clothing for any survival here. It had once been beautiful. Now it was torn, stiff with blood and ice. And in her arms, a child, curled tight against her chest, buried in the tangle of cloth and bone, with matching blue skin and long white hair. The child wasn't moving. The woman's lips were still moving. Softly, desperately. Not to Jonas, to the girl. Jonas took a step forward, then stopped. A faint red light flickered on the snow beside them. His eyes dropped. A broken tracking node lay half-buried, crushed under what looked like a boot heel, still sparking weakly, failing to send its signal home. She'd been hunted. Jonas took another step. The woman didn't look at him. She didn't speak, just kept singing, voice barely above a whisper, fingers stiff with cold. "Don't take her," she whispered, eyes half closed. Please let her sleep. Let her dream one last time. His gut twisted. A memory slammed into him without warning. Another snowfield. Another set of blue skin. Another mother. A different time, a different outpost. But the same scene. Only that time, he hadn't made it in time. He hadn't tried hard enough. He blinked hard, forcing the thought away. The cold wasn't going to wait for him to wallow. Hey, he said, stepping closer. You need to get up. She's still breathing, but not for long. The woman's arms tightened around the child. Her mouth opened, then closed. Jonas saw it then. A small, fresh scar across her collarbone, still swollen. Not surgical, branded. He crouched, lowered his voice. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to take her. But I can't help her out here. You both need heat. Shelter. Food. Still nothing. Then the child twitched. A soft exhale slipped from her lips. And a sound. Fragile. Hoarse. Mama. A pause. Then, barely louder than the wind. Is this the dream or the stars? Jonas didn't wait. He pulled off his thermal wrap and activated the emergency heat gel, slinging it across both of them in one fluid motion. Then he slipped his arms under the girl's light body, bracing for the mother's panic. It didn't come. She flinched but didn't stop him. I'll carry her, he said. Can you walk? She hesitated, then nodded once. Slowly, she rose shakily, one bare foot cracking ice as it tore away from where it had frozen to the ground. She leaned into her own weight as if her bones remembered chains. Together, they moved through the storm. Jonas walked ahead, breaking the wind. He kept the child tucked beneath his coat, her body too cold, too still, but alive. Alive was enough. When they reached the relay station, Jonas slammed the door shut behind them. The storm howled for a moment longer, then vanished into silence. Inside, the stale warmth of recycled air and low-light emergency bulbs wrapped around them like a memory. Shafts of orange and blue light flickered against the frost-covered walls. Jonas led her past old cargo crates and down into the sunken core, where a heater hummed quietly and two thin mats were laid beside it. He placed the child gently down. The woman knelt beside her. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the wrap. Jonas knelt too, rummaged through his kit, pulled a nutrient sachet, a hydration tube, and his cleanest cloth. He offered them without a word. She didn't move. Eat, he said softly. Drink, then sleep. Still silence. But eventually, her hand rose, took the pouch. Jonas sat back, watching her, watching the child. She was smaller up close, too thin, her cheeks hollow, limbs trembling in her sleep. A thin necklace, woven from braided silver thread, hung around her neck. At its center, a soft blue crystal, no bigger than a fingernail, glowed with a pulse of light. He'd seen something like that once before, on a different world. It had mint bloodline. The woman noticed him staring. She didn't cover the necklace. Instead, she asked, voice dry as bone, "Why did you help us?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not the frostbitten skin or the tattered robe, or even the eyes too tired for fear. Just her, a mother, a woman who had crawled through hell for a child who was still breathing. His voice came out quiet, hollow, not from shame, but from something older. "Because I once let someone like you die," he said. "This time, I won't look away." The heater hummed. She didn't answer, but she pulled the child closer, not protectively, but gently. Her shoulders eased just slightly. Her eyes drifted shut. Jonas stood, turned off the overhead light, and walked to the far side of the station. He didn't sleep. He just watched the dark, listened to the girls breathing, and wondered, who were they? Who had done this? And what would happen next? Outside, the snow fell like knives. Inside, for the first time in years, Jonas Varen wasn't alone. And it scared him more than the cold ever had. The heater clicked again, and this time, Jonas listened to it. For hours, he'd only sat in silence, hearing everything but registering nothing, just the sound of his own breath and the weight of his own choices. Now that dull mechanical click broke through the haze, a reminder that the systems were still holding, that the shelter was still warm. that they were still alive. Across from him, the woman slept in a shallow sprawl, her body curled protectively around the child. Her long white hair, tangled and stiff, framed a face that had known too much cold and not enough kindness. The girl lay motionless against her chest, swaddled in both a thermal wrap and her mother's torn robe. The only movement came from the faint rise and fall of their breathing. That, and the slow pulse of the girl's necklace, a blue stone, dim and steady, catching the flicker of emergency lighting like it remembered stars. Jonas watched them. He didn't know their names, didn't know what planet they came from, what they were running from, or why a child like that would wear a pendant reserved for bloodline royalty on some fringe colonies. What he did know was that they hadn't died in the snow. Because of him. For now, that was enough. The heater clicked again. The silence after was louder than before. Jonas stood and crossed to the secondary storage rack. He moved carefully, mechanical, practiced. Years alone had turned motion into ritual. No wasted steps, no loud sounds. He pulled a sealed ration pack from the rear shelf, tore it open, and dropped the meal cube into the warming bowl. The unit beeped once, then began its low hum, slowly restoring the contents to something edible. Behind him, a small voice whispered, "Are we still hiding?" He turned. The child had stirred. Her violet eyes peeked out from under the wrap, wide and glassy, blinking slow as if unsure whether she'd woken from sleep or memory. Jonas said nothing at first. She shifted closer to her mother, who hadn't woken. Then, after a beat, she whispered again, "If we hide too long, do we forget how to play?" Her voice was thin, scratchy, but her words cut deeper than he expected. He approached slowly, crouching a few feet away. "You're safe here," he said. The girl watched him closely. "I like your coat," she said after a pause. "It smells like smoke. And soap." He glanced down at his patched-up thermal layers. "That's a new combination." The warming unit beeped again. Jonas rose, retrieved the bowl, and returned to the pair. He set it beside the girl. She sniffed it. Her nose wrinkled. "This is food." He didn't smile, but his mouth twitched. Technically. She hesitated, then reached for it. Her hand trembled. She tried to eat quickly, too quickly, and choked on the first bite. Jonas moved on instinct. He crouched, hand lightly on her back, steadying her. "Slow down," he said gently. "It's not going anywhere." The girl coughed once, then managed a second bite. Slower this time. Chewed. Swallowed. Something flickered in her expression. Warmth. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Her mother stirred. The woman's eyes opened slowly, glassy with sleep. Her gaze darted to her daughter, then to Jonas. Her body tensed, not quite alarmed, but not at ease either. Jonas stepped back. "She's eating," he said. "She's okay." The woman didn't speak, but she touched the girl's shoulder, grounding her. The girl looked up. "Mama," she said softly. "He gave me warm mush. I think it's a little bit alive." Jonas gave her a deadpan look. "It better not be." The woman's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled more gently into her daughter's hair. Jonas knelt again. "Do you have a name?" he asked the girl. She blinked. "I'm not supposed to tell strangers." He nodded. "Fair enough." A long silence settled again. Then, without warning, the girl tilted her head. "Are you a robot?" Jonas blinked. "What?" "Like the ones in stories," she said. "That look real but aren't. Mama said some people are made of metal on the inside. Not hearts, just wires." He stared at her, unsure what to say. "You don't smile," she added. "You move like someone told you how, but you forgot who." That one hit a little too close. "No," he said finally. "I'm not a robot." "Oh," she said. "Okay." She paused. "Can I call you Mr. Not Robot?" He gave a small shrug. "I've been called worse." That earned a tiny laugh. A quiet one, but it was the first laugh he'd heard in years that didn't come from a recording. He turned to the woman again. "You don't have to trust me, but you're not going to make it outside. Whatever chased you, whatever left that tracker next to your body, it might still be looking." Her gaze flicked toward the corner where the broken beacon still sat, its light long extinguished. "I crushed it," she said. Her voice was low, musical but tired. "I thought it stopped. Maybe I was wrong." Jonas nodded. Maybe. She looked down at her daughter. She wasn't supposed to be born. That stopped him cold. He waited. Let her say the next part when she was ready. They called her an error. A blood breach. Said she wouldn't live past first sleep. And you ran. Her eyes met his then, dark, stormlit eyes that had seen too many locked doors. I walked, she said quietly. We had no ship, no map, just silence. Jonas didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he walked to the far shelf, rummaged through the old medkit, and pulled out a set of heated gloves and socks. He tossed them onto the mat beside her. She didn't touch them at first, but her daughter did, curious, fascinated. Then Jonas did something he hadn't done in years. He turned away, opened his emergency locker, and pulled out a backup thermal blanket. The last one. He brought it to them, wrapped it around both mother and child. The woman stared at him. Why do this? He met her gaze. I already told you, he said. I failed someone once. Someone who ran. Someone with a child. She looked down. Her hand found her daughter's. The girl yawned, curled tighter beneath the blanket. Then, just before her eyes fluttered closed, she whispered, Mama, this place smells like a person. What do you mean? Her mother asked softly. The girl smiled. Like someone lives here. Not just machines. Jonas turned away and pretended not to hear the sound that cracked softly in the woman's throat. Later, long after they were asleep, Jonas sat alone near the wall. The emergency light pulsed over worn steel and rusted rivets. The child stirred once in her sleep, murmuring a word in a language he didn't know. The mother's hand never left her back. And Jonas, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like he was hiding. Not completely, but he still didn't dare hope. Not yet. Jonas woke to the sound of soft breathing and the faint, rhythmic scrape of something being dragged across frost. For a moment, the familiarity of the shelter's stale air and the distant hum of geothermal pumps lulled him into believing he was alone again, that the last 2 days had been nothing more than memory echoing through his solitude. Then he heard the whisper of movement, deliberate, careful, a soft shuffle, not of boots or claws, but of bare feet sliding across smooth steel. He opened his eyes. The girl was awake, crouched beside one of the frosted panels near the heater. A small piece of burnt coal clutched in her hand, her fingers blackened with soot. She was drawing. He sat up slowly, careful not to startle her. His back cracked under the motion, a quiet reminder that the floor hadn't gotten any softer in the night. She didn't turn. Her arm moved with focused precision, short strokes across the white sheet of frost. When she paused, it was only to tilt her head and study the wall as if expecting it to talk back. Jonas rose, stepped over, and crouched beside her. The drawing wasn't detailed, just stick figures etched in uneven lines. 3 of them. One tall and wide-shouldered, one tall and narrow, and one small in the middle with curls drawn as loops around her round head. They were holding hands. A crooked rectangle above them labeled in shakily drawn glyphs. Home. Next to it, she'd drawn what looked like a rocket, if rockets had smiles. And beneath that, an unidentifiable blob with a face. Jonas raised an eyebrow. You drew a potato? She grinned without looking at him. It's not a potato. It's a space poop. Ah, he said deadpan. Well, that's worse. It's happy. Of course it is. She glanced at him sidelong, gauging his expression. Do you like it? He hesitated, then nodded. I do. Except maybe the poop. She snorted and got back to work. From behind them, a soft voice broke the quiet. Leary. The girl turned immediately. Sherian sat upright now, back against the wall, one hand pressed over her ribs. Her hair was a white curtain falling across her shoulder, but her eyes were clear, focused. She looked at the drawing, then at Jonas. Her expression remained unreadable. I'll let her draw, he said simply. Sherian looked down at her hands. You let her be. That wasn't just a statement. It was something else. A measure. A test. Jonas stood and walked to the heating unit. He adjusted the power output, then opened the small cabinet beside it. A ration bar, softened overnight by proximity to the vents, waited inside. He brought it to them. Sherian didn't reach for it. She kept her eyes on him. You don't ask questions. You'd lie. Her lips twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. Is that what you did before? She asked. Asked questions and got lies? Jonas sat across from them, back to the wall. No. I used to give people names they didn't earn, then sent them running into storms worse than this one. Is that what you think I did? She asked quietly. I think you earned your name, and you kept running anyway. Sherian went quiet. Leary began humming as she colored in the eyes of the stick figures. The sound was soft, tuneless, but not sad. She's changed since the snow, Sherian said after a moment. She smiles again. You did that. Jonas shook his head. She's just somewhere she's not being hunted. And yet you keep expecting me to run, Sherian murmured. Because you haven't unpacked, he said, gesturing subtly to the pack she hadn't touched since arriving. Sherian leaned forward. And you? When did you unpack? His reply was a long silence. Then, with the faintest bitterness, I never did. I buried everything in crates, even the parts of me that still worked. Leary had finished her drawing. She stepped back, examined it, then gently blew warm breath over the frost. It smeared, distorted the figures. She frowned, then turned to Jonas. Do you have shiny things? What kind of shiny? Batteries, she said seriously. I'm building a robot. Jonas raised a brow. That explains the power failures. She opened the pouch on her belt and pulled out a tangled mess of wires and an old comm chip wrapped in foil. This is Zap. He needs snackies. He reached forward, retrieved a small flashlight from his jacket pocket, and opened the battery compartment. Only 2, he warned, handing them to her. And if you short-circuit my heater, you're sleeping outside. I'll make him polite, she promised. Jonas watched as she retreated to the far end of the room, kneeling behind crate. The soft clicks of assembly echoed behind her like the beginning of a lullaby made from plastic and broken things. He turned back to Sherian. Was she born there? He asked. Sherian hesitated, then nodded. They made us believe we were vessels. That children like her, like me, should never exist. Purity was their word. Perfection. I was marked when they discovered I'd been hiding a second gene pattern. I thought they'd terminate me, but they didn't. No, they said she was a glitch in the batch, an anomaly. But she breathed, and when I held her, she opened her eyes. Jonas said nothing. I don't remember the escape, Sherian said softly. Only snow and silence, and her fingers tightening around mine. Jonas thought of the old comm relay tower, the one where he'd last seen another mother's fingers lose their grip. I gave someone your name, he said. A long time ago. Not yours exactly, but close enough. A forged profile. False bloodlines. They didn't make it through processing. Sherian's gaze didn't waver. She didn't look angry. Just tired. You've been carrying ghosts, she said. Jonas gave a small nod. I keep thinking if I bury them deep enough, they'll stop knocking. And do they? No. The silence between them now was intense. It was heavy, not with suspicion, but with something beginning to shift. The first edge of understanding. Not forgiveness. That wasn't the shape of it. Sherian leaned forward slightly, fingers brushing the corner of the thermal blanket. She asked if she could call you ours last night, she said. Jonas's breath caught. What did you say? He asked, voice quiet. I said it was her choice. He looked at the girl, still working on her robot in the corner, her fingers smudged with soot and wire grease. Then he looked at Sherian. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space being made. Something changed then, quietly, invisibly, but undeniably. Leary looked up and grinned. Mr. Jonas? Yeah. You look like a jungle prince now. He blinked. Excuse me. She pointed. He glanced down. His utility jacket was covered in scavenged wires, beads, and what looked like moss. I fixed your coat, she said proudly. You looked boring before. Sherian stifled a laugh behind her hand. Jonas just stared at her. You're welcome, Leary added sweetly. And for the first time in a very long time, Jonas Varen laughed. A real sound. Not bitter. Not hollow. Just human. Just alive. And for the first time, Sherian didn't flinch at the sound. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. She didn't fall asleep, but she didn't need to stay alert either. Not for now. The light in the shelter had changed. not in brightness, but in quality, warmer, steadier, as if the structure itself had decided they were no longer temporary, that they belonged here, that they'd stayed long enough to be trusted. Jonas moved quietly through the main room, adjusting the solar collector to absorb what little filtered light made it through the storm-smeared dome. The wind outside was gentler today, rolling low across the horizon like a tired animal settling down after a long chase. Behind him, Sharian stirred. She had been asleep, really asleep, for the first time since they arrived. Her breathing had been deep, rhythmic, like something long denied was finally allowed. But now she was sitting up against the side wall, Leary curled beside her like a blanket folded in half. The child's curls were tangled, her fingers still wrapped around the leg of her sock puppet creation, Captain Sock, whose mismatched button eyes stared into nothing. Sharian's voice was quiet. "You were a forger. That's what you said." Jonas didn't look up. He adjusted the collector again. "I was. You gave people new names." He nodded. "Sometimes new faces, new bloodlines, entire histories, whatever they paid for. Did you give one to yourself?" That gave him pause. His hands stilled on the panel. "No," he said. "I didn't want a new name. I just wanted the old one forgotten." She watched him for a long moment. Then, "Did you have family? A partner?" He finally turned to face her. "Once. A sister. She died young. After that, there was no one else. I kept it that way. Safer." Sharian didn't push further. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached for the small robe she'd unfolded earlier, a ceremonial garment, worn and patched with uneven thread. She laid it across her lap with deliberate reverence. Jonas stepped closer, crouching near the edge of her bedding. "What is that?" he asked softly. "My original garb," she said, "from before I was reassigned. We were called memory bearers, a caste trained to remember the names that mattered, the ones that weren't allowed to be written down." She traced one of the silver-stitched patterns with a fingertip. "They took us first. Said stories made us fragile. Said remembrance was a defect. They didn't kill us, though. They changed us. Reconditioned." Jonas leaned forward, elbows on knees. "That's when they put you in the reproduction facilities." Sharian nodded, not flinching at the bluntness. "They called it optimization. I was healthy. My gene profile stable. I had a bloodline clean enough to justify selective pairing." Jonas hesitated. Then, "Lo, was there someone else?" "Before." A long pause. Then she shook her head. "There was a pairing. Assigned. Not a person. A donor code. I never saw his face. Never heard his voice. He was a file entry and a directive. Nothing more." Jonas's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. "If he's still alive," she added, "he doesn't know Leary exists. And if he died, he never knew what they used him for. Either way, he is not part of us." Jonas met her eyes. There was no bitterness in her tone. No sorrow. Just truth. "I never wanted to carry a child," she continued. "Not like that. Not by mandate. So when I felt her move, when I knew she was alive inside me, growing anyway, I didn't rejoice." She stared at her own hands. "I panicked. I counted days. I made plans. I wondered how long I could hide her heartbeat from scans." Jonas didn't breathe. Then one night, she kicked. Just once. And I felt something I didn't recognize. Not fear. Not duty. Something holy. She looked down at Leary. "I sang that night. Broke silence. Broke protocol. I named her. Before I ever escaped. Before I ran." Jonas reached out, gently adjusting a fold in the child's blanket. "She doesn't talk about her past. She doesn't remember the cold place. Not truly. Just shadows. That's all she should keep." He nodded. Then Sharian surprised him again. "She wants more," she said. Jonas looked up. "She draws others in her pictures. Not just us. Sometimes another small shape. Sometimes two. Not detailed, but imagined." Jonas exhaled slowly. "You think she's lonely? I think she's content. But contentment isn't the same as joy." They sat in silence for a long while. Then she added, almost whispering, "I don't know if I could ever choose to do that again. Carry another life. Even freely." "You don't have to," Jonas said gently. "No one should ever ask that of you again." She looked at him, and her voice softened. But if I wanted to, one day, would you still stay? Jonas met her gaze without hesitation. I'd stay even if you didn't, he said. And that answer settled into the room like warmth, like moss taking root in stone. Sharian reached for her robe again and, for the first time, began stitching a new symbol into the hem, a design that wasn't part of any cast or memory line. Just a shape. Simple. Rounded. Intertwined threads. Something new. Something chosen. Leary stirred then, sitting up and blinking in the light. Is it tomorrow yet? She asked. Sharian smiled. Almost. Leary crawled into Jonas's lap without asking, dropping Captain Sock onto the floor with a dramatic sigh. Today was too quiet, she grumbled. Too quiet, Jonas asked, raising an eyebrow. No explosions. No running. Not even one monster. Jonas leaned back, arms around her small form. Sounds like a good day to me. Leary squinted at him. You're weird. He nodded solemnly. Thank you. Sharian watched them, and for the first time, the warmth in her chest wasn't just survival. It was belonging. It was the feeling of something once broken beginning to grow back whole. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone else's story. She felt like her own. It began with the ground humming. Not a noise, exactly. More like a sensation felt through the soles of their feet. A subtle tremor that ran up the spine, barely perceptible but undeniable once noticed. Jonas paused mid-step, a coil of wire in one hand and a soldering tool in the other, staring at the floor like it had just whispered to him. Sharian noticed it too. She looked up from where she was threading old filament through the remains of a lamp casing, eyes narrowing. Do you feel that? Yeah, Jonas said. He set the tool down. It's not mechanical. From the other side of the room, Leary sat cross-legged beside her mostly dismembered robot. Zap now sported a bottle cap for a head and battery leads for arms. She looked up, her bioluminescent freckles dimming a little. That happened when she got nervous. Did I break the floor? She asked wide-eyed. No, Jonas said. This is bigger. He crossed to the console. Fingers flying over old touchscreen panels, he pulled up seismic feedback from the geothermal intake system buried deep beneath the relay station. What had once been a stable thermal sink was now glowing red on the diagnostic, pulsing unevenly out of rhythm. Not overheating, not a mechanical failure. Movement. From below. Jonas cursed under his breath. Sharian stepped closer. What is it? A shift, he said. Tectonic or pressure-related. The ice shelf under this region has vents from when they tried to terraform weathering. The system failed before they could stabilize the core fractures. Most of the planet's crust is held together by temperature. If something cracks. Leary stood, holding Zap like a shield. Is it going to explode? Jonas didn't want to answer. Another tremor rolled through the floor. This one louder. The wall lights flickered. Sharian took Leary's hand immediately, pulling her gently toward the reinforced shelter corridor. Jonas followed, sweeping tools into a satchel and slinging it over his shoulder. Do we run? Sharian asked. He hesitated. No, not yet. I need to see what we're dealing with. He opened the hatch leading to the upper observatory tunnel, an old crawl space of frost-coated polyglass that led above the station's dome. Once used to monitor long-range antennas, it now served no purpose except height. The wind had picked up outside, and the faint, sickly glow of the geothermal steam vents lit the edges of the horizon in uneven pulses. Jonas climbed a ladder, boots clanking, breath fogging inside his visor as he opened the exterior periscope hatch. Then he saw it. To the east, past the collapsed satellite relay and buried drone mount, the ice was moving. Not melting, heaving. Like something underneath, it was breathing. The landscape rippled, cracked, and sank. An entire field of hardened frost vanished, as if swallowed from below, replaced by jagged fractures that pulsed with dull orange light. The crust wasn't shifting, it was failing. Jonas dropped back down into the tunnel and sealed the hatch. We need to pack essentials, he said the moment his feet hit the floor. Now! Sharian didn't question him. She didn't panic either. Just scooped Leary into her arms and began moving. Leary clung to her mother, burying her face in her neck. Is the floor angry? she whispered. Sharian kissed her temple. No, little star. It's just remembering how to move. They worked quickly. Rations, thermal packs, medical kit. Jonas overrode the access to the emergency crawler buried in the sub-bay. Half functional, but capable of holding 3 bodies and surviving outside pressure for a limited time. The shelter groaned. A deep, rumbling sound rippled through the walls. Jonas moved faster. They were nearly ready when the first real quake hit. Not a tremor, an impact. The floor buckled, tossing Leary from Sharian's arms and knocking Jonas against the wall. Sparks flew from the ceiling as the heater's power conduit split and overloaded, plunging the room into half-darkness. Jonas scrambled toward the child, dragging her under the steel reinforcement of the central console. Sharian crawled beside them seconds later, wrapping her arms around them both as another shockwave rolled beneath the station. Above, through the cracks in the ceiling vents, they could hear it, ice breaking. Massive, grinding plates of it collapsing and reforming in motion. Like the entire planet was exhaling after a long, frozen breath. Leary shook silently in Sharian's arms, eyes wide with terror. Jonas put his hand on her head, holding her steady against his chest. It's going to pass, he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Sharian leaned her forehead against his shoulder, her breathing ragged. Is it a core fracture? I think so, Jonas said. The crust might collapse entirely in this quadrant. And the geothermal vents? She asked. If they go with it, we'll lose the heat sinks. It'll be like living on an airless moon. Sharian nodded slowly. Then we run. Jonas didn't want to. He didn't want to leave the shelter he'd built, the place that had become something more than walls and wires. He looked at the frost-covered control panels, the makeshift heater, the child's doodles still glowing faintly on the walls. But the truth was undeniable. This place was dying. Crawlers ready, he said. Pack light. 1 bag each. Sharian met his gaze. Where will we go? Jonas looked down at Leary, whose small hands were still gripping his jacket tightly, her eyes reflecting the emergency lights like twin stars. West, he said. There's a moss valley along the geothermal rift line. If it's still stable, we can survive there until the thaw. Sharian nodded once. Then we leave the ghosts behind. They gathered what they could, moving with the focused precision of people who knew how quickly hope could collapse. As Jonas slung the last bag over his shoulder, he paused in the hatchway. He looked back once, at the station where he had chosen to disappear, where silence had once been his only companion, where a blue-skinned woman and her luminous child had rewritten his place in the world. Now the silence was breaking. The earth beneath them roared again, but he didn't flinch this time. He turned, took Sharian's hand, and led them into the ice. And the sky, for the first time in years, cracked open with light. The crawler's wheels cut a gentle groove into the frost, carving silence as it rolled westward, away from the fracture basin that had once been their shelter, their hiding place, and, for a fleeting moment, their sanctuary. Jonas didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because everything he could say felt smaller than what had happened. Smaller than the way the earth had trembled beneath them, swallowing the past whole. Smaller than the way Sharian had looked at him afterward. Equal parts relief and certainty, like she'd made a decision the moment the sky cracked open and didn't need to justify it. Leary slept again, curled up in the narrow bunk behind them, one foot still peeking out from beneath the thermal blanket, freckles pulsing faintly with residual light. She was exhausted, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer effort of feeling safe. Sharian sat beside Jonas in the front seat, angled slightly toward the viewport. She didn't ask where they were going. He hadn't told her. They both knew this wasn't a flight anymore. It was a choice. And choosing was heavier than running. They crested a ridge just as the sun broke through a lattice of high-altitude frost clouds. It wasn't warm, not truly, but for the first time in days, the light didn't feel cruel. Below them stretched a valley that shimmered with steam, geothermal breath rising through cracked stone, feeding clusters of glowing moss and painting the ice with golden veins. Jonas slowed the crawler, letting it glide to a quiet halt. Sharian exhaled softly. You found it. He nodded. Old terraforming maps listed it as a failed thermal pocket. Survey teams gave up after the collapse. But it looks like the vents held. It's warm enough to stay. She didn't smile. Not fully. But her eyes held something close to gratitude. They climbed out into the steam-thick air. Jonas felt it immediately. The way his joints stopped aching, the way his breath didn't freeze inside his chest. He could smell sulfur, minerals, and moss. He could feel the earth breathing beneath his boots. Sharian stepped forward, testing the stone. Her toes sank slightly into a bed of heated moss, and she knelt, fingers spreading across its surface like she was blessing it. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Jonas moved to the rear of the crawler and gently lifted Leary into his arms. She stirred, blinking up at him with sleep-hazed eyes. "Are we still hiding?" she mumbled. He shook his head. "No, little lantern. Not here." Sharian had already begun unpacking. Not like a refugee, like someone planting roots. They set up the tarp beside a ridge of black rock, just high enough to shield against the wind. Jonas staked it down with magnetic clamps, while Sharian fashioned a small cooking pit using scavenged heating coils and volcanic stone. They worked in unspoken rhythm, efficient, practiced, and intimate in the quiet way shared survival creates. That night, after they'd eaten and the tarp was sealed, Jonas stepped outside alone. The valley shimmered under starlight. Thin veils of steam drifted across the landscape like breath. The geothermal mist caught the moonlight in waves, turning the world silver and gold. He heard movement behind him. Sharian emerged from the tarp and joined him, wrapping a blanket over her shoulders. Her hair was loose, drifting down her back like poured snow. Her face was bare in the moonlight, tranquil, yes, but shadowed. "I used to believe quiet was dangerous," she said. "Where I grew up, silence meant someone was listening, watching, waiting." Jonas didn't speak. He just stood beside her and waited. She continued, her voice lower now. "But this silence, it's different. It doesn't feel empty. It feels earned," he said quietly. She turned to him, her breath curling in the cold. "Do you still want to disappear?" He met her gaze. "No. I think I've been trying to remember who I was before I disappeared." Sharian nodded slowly. "And I'm not sure I like that man," Jonas said. "But I don't have to be him anymore." The quiet that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, like a heartbeat between words. Then she surprised him. "You could have left us. After the collapse. No one would have blamed you." He didn't look away. "I don't want to leave." She stepped closer. "Why not?" He answered with something he hadn't said out loud until now. "Because you're not a burden. And she's not just a child I rescued. You're both something I want to stay for." Sharian didn't reply right away. She looked down at the ground, at the moss glowing beneath their feet, alive despite the ice, the collapse, the silence. "Then stay," she said softly. He reached out. She let him. His fingers brushed hers, gentle, reverent. She turned her hand over and laced their fingers together. And just like that, something shifted between them. Not a confession, not a promise, a presence. Later, after returning to the tent and checking that Leary was still asleep, curled under the blankets, Zap tucked beside her, Sharian sat cross-legged across from Jonas near the heater coil. She studied the girl for a moment, then looked back at him. "She's doing better." He nodded. "She still draws eyes on everything, though. That's how she checks if things are real. If it has eyes, it has thoughts. Feelings." Jonas smiled faintly. "She gave me eyes once. On my coat. Said I looked like a jungle prince." Sharian tilted her head. "You didn't like it?" "I didn't know how to deserve it," he admitted. "But I think I'm learning." Sharian was quiet for a long moment. Then, voice low, "Do you think she's lonely?" Jonas looked at her. "Why do you ask?" "She doesn't say it, but I see her watching the sky sometimes. Like she's waiting for something she can't name. Not danger. Not a ship. Just someone like her." He followed her gaze toward Leary, whose breathing was soft and steady. "You're not talking about other refugees," Jonas said. "No," she replied. "I'm asking if it's selfish to want to give her a sibling." That caught him off guard. Not because it was unexpected, but because of how gently she'd said it. He considered the question, then answered honestly. "No," he said, "not if it comes from love." Sherian looked into the firelight. I don't want to do it because I'm afraid of being alone. I want to do it because for the first time, I can choose. Jonas reached across the space and touched her knee. Then when you're ready, we choose together. Her hand covered his. Not just survival this time, she whispered, but something that can grow. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead to hers, and let that closeness say everything they didn't need to. Outside, the steam danced in soft spirals. Inside, a family was taking root, not in fear, but in the quiet, steady warmth of something finally beginning. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace. They reached the valley at dusk, when the light wasn't quite golden and the wind had finally stopped trying to claw the sky apart. The crawler's reserve power hummed low as it coasted over the last ridge, revealing a depression in the ice where geothermal vents bled warmth through cracks in the earth. Thin mist curled upward like smoke from a sleeping giant's mouth. Below them stretched a basin scattered with moss-laced rocks, shallow steam pools, and skeletal remnants of some long-forgotten survey outpost. The metal bones of the structure shimmered with frost, but the moss glowed faintly in the steam's breath, green, gold, and silver in the half-light. Life, where there should have been none. Jonas parked the crawler near a stone rise and powered it down. Silence fell. Sherian stepped out first, barefoot despite the cold, her tall frame moving with quiet, measured grace. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the warmth of the steam rise against her skin. Her white hair stirred in the air, soft and untangled now, falling in clean lines over her shoulders. Leary followed, hopping down from the crawler with Zap tucked under her arm. Her cheeks glowed with health again. No fever now, just the soft pulse of her freckles, blinking like stars beneath her skin. Jonas stood last. He looked over the landscape, not with suspicion, but with a kind of guarded awe. The place didn't feel hostile. It didn't feel safe either, but it felt real, alive in a way that Weatherin 6 rarely allowed. They made camp beneath a stone overhang where the heat from a vent pocket rose gently through the rock. The air was warmer than any shelter they'd known. Jonas sealed a tarp into the stone with magnetic clamps and activated a portable barrier field. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep the frost out and the heat in. They didn't talk much at first. The quiet was its own language now. Leary sat cross-legged, humming to herself as she arranged rocks into a ring around her latest creation, a crude solar lamp Jonas had built from crawler scrap and a melted lens. She insisted it was the sun. A small one, she clarified, because we're still learning how to be warm. Sherian began drawing lines into the dirt near the steam vent. Elegant curves. Glyphs. When Jonas asked, she explained, the names of the stars my mother gave me. If I don't draw them, I forget them. He crouched beside her and watched her fingers move. You don't speak her name, he said. Sherian's hand paused. She was taken during the syndicate purge. I never saw what they did to her. I only heard the screams through the ventilation shafts. She didn't flinch. She told it like a fact. But her breath hitched at the end, the only betrayal. Jonas reached over and brushed his fingers against the dirt beside hers, close enough to touch, but not quite. She'd be proud you made it here, he said. Sherian looked at him, long and quiet. I didn't come here. You carried us. Jonas shook his head. You survived. I just followed the sound of your song. The silence between them softened. Later, as darkness fell fully, the stars emerged, clear and vast. No city lights here. No orbital clutter. Just sky. The kind that made you feel small and human and worthy all at once. Leary crawled into Jonas's lap without a word and leaned back against his chest. She didn't ask this time. Didn't warn him. Just chose him. The gesture hit harder than it should have. You're warm, she said sleepily. You make a good blanket, he replied. I'm not a blanket, she said, yawning. I'm a heater with feelings. Jonas smiled. Sherian lay on her side, propped up by one elbow, watching them. Do you regret it? She asked. He didn't ask what she meant. No, he said. I thought I came to this planet to disappear. Turns out, I came to remember. She nodded once. And will you keep running, now that you remember? Jonas gently adjusted the thermal blanket over Leary's legs. No, this time I stay. We build something. Not for hiding, but for living. Sherian's expression shifted. Something deep softened in her. Not a smile, not exactly, but something fuller, lighter. She reached into the satchel at her side and pulled out 3 folded cloths, stitched together from scavenged fabric, padded and worn. Each bore a symbol. One was hers, the moonlight curve of her line. One was Leary's, drawn by hand, with star marks and circles. The third was new. It bore no crest, no mark of bloodline or caste. Just a name, Varen. She handed it to Jonas without a word. His fingers closed around it slowly. It wasn't a gesture of thanks. It was belonging. He nodded once. Then he stood and walked to the edge of the ridge. The wind had calmed. The world no longer screamed with fracture. Beneath the mist, mosses glowed softly, like quiet embers waiting for hands to tend them. In that moment, he didn't feel like a criminal, or a fugitive, or a ghost. He felt human. He felt chosen. The girl had said it before. Now he believed it. He was theirs, and they were his. The sky above them cracked wide and cold. But here, in this basin of warmth and memory and new names, they were no longer surviving the world. They were part of it, together. The days had settled into a rhythm. Steam curled gently through the mossy basin at dawn, leaving the air thick with warmth and light. Jonas had built a small solar kiln from salvaged lenses and reflector plates. Sherian had carved a shelf into the stone wall with a heated blade, lining it with preserved roots, powdered herbs, and seed packets salvaged from the crawler's emergency stores. Leary, however, was bored. Not sad. Not restless in the dangerous way she once was. Just understimulated. She had organized every stone by shape, built 4 lopsided moss forts for Zap the robot, attempted to teach a beetle how to sit, and, most recently, painted the inside of her blanket with berry juice because she decided it was emotionally dull. When she fell asleep that night, face down on her mother's lap, arms wrapped around Zap's latest paper-glued friend, Sherian gently shifted her weight and stood. Jonas looked up from the power cell he was rebuilding. She wore herself out, he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She misses noise, Sherian replied softly. She's not used to the world being this still. This safe. Jonas nodded. I think she liked the danger. I think she liked being the reason we had a run together. Sherian stepped outside the tarp and onto the stone path. Jonas followed without a word, falling in his stride beside her. The mist was thin tonight, the stars clearer than ever. They walked in silence for a long while. Then she spoke. Did you ever want more children? The question caught him off guard. Not in a bad way, just enough to still his breath for a moment. He looked sideways at her, studying her expression. Not testing, not teasing, just honest curiosity. I never had the chance to think about it, he said. When I was running ops, everything was short-term. No attachments. I wasn't supposed to care where people ended up. And after, he trailed off. After meant everything. After the woman he couldn't save. After disappearing. After guilt had become muscle memory. Sherian nodded. I used to think my blood wasn't something I wanted to pass on, she said quietly. Not after what they did. What they made me part of. Jonas didn't answer. He just waited. But Leary isn't a scar, she went on. She's the space between pain. The breath between shouts. She makes me want to plant something. Grow something. Even if it's small. They sat on the edge of a flat, sun-warmed stone. Sherian pulled her knees up, arms wrapped loosely around them. Her long hair drifted across her bare shoulders like silk drawn by the wind. Jonas studied her face. How different she looked now from the woman who had once sung a last lullaby in the snow. There was still shadow in her gaze, but now it was shadow, softened by light. He looked back toward the tent, where the faint pulse of Leary's freckles still glimmered against the fabric. She'd be a good sister, he said. Sherian's lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. She would, she agreed. She already talks to Zap like he's real. Technically, that qualifies. A soft laugh escaped her, low, rich, private. It stirred something old in him. Something quiet and warm that had once been drowned in guilt but was learning to breathe again. After a moment, he asked, "Is that something you want?" She turned toward him fully. Not coy, not distant, just vulnerable. "I think I want to choose," she said. "This time, choose who? Choose why? Choose when? Not be told, not be used." Jonas nodded slowly. "I don't want to give her a sibling just because she's lonely," Sherian added. "I want to do it because we've built something worth adding to." Jonas looked at her, and his voice dropped lower, more intimate. "I think we have." Silence bloomed between them, thick and gentle, like fog wrapping around a tree. Sherian's fingers brushed his. Not by accident. Jonas turned his hand, laced his fingers with hers, and brought the back of her hand to his lips. He didn't kiss it with heat. He kissed it like a vow, a promise carved in breath and bone. Sherian leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder, hand still in his. "If," she whispered, "when it happens, I want to be here, in this warmth, not in flight, not in fear. It will be," he said. He pressed a kiss to her temple and held her there, under stars that didn't blink and earth that had finally stopped shaking beneath their feet. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to, because they weren't planning an escape anymore. They were planting a future, a family, a life, chosen, not given. And for the first time in all the frozen years behind them, that was enough.